Where's Katie? Hello. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Buonasera a tutti. Welcome to Villa Volkonsky, the residence of the British ambassador in Rome. He's not around today, but we have somebody else. Eleanor Sanders, our Vice Ambasciatore, Deputy Head of Mission, to whom I'll give the floor in a few seconds. Just to let you know in a few seconds how we have organized this event. We're going to spend less than a couple of hours together talking about women in economics. We have very distinguished guests and speakers here, both in presence and joining us remotely in a moment. And the first panel of the two will be moderated by a good friend, Amy Kazmin, the Financial Times correspondent in Italy, living in Rome. He's been here for around a year now, right? And she will be running a first session interviewing the panelists for this first session. The second session, which I have the privilege of moderating with three other panelists, distinguished panelists, will be even more interactive, and we would like to see many questions from the floor, in particular from the students who are here, who can use this as an opportunity to ask whatever question they have in mind for the distinguished guests that will be talking tonight. So for those of you who haven't received this, at the entrance we have a little piece of paper where you can scribble down your question, write your name down, and put this in a fishbowl, which is available next door. Martina here has more of this. If you want to write down your questions inspired by the first panel, or even ask questions to the first panel, feel free to do so. I'll stop there, and I will now give the floor to Eleanor Sanders for some opening remarks. And I hope you enjoy this event tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pierre, grazie. Buonasera a tutti. Good evening, everybody. As Pierre said, I'm Eleanor Sanders. I'm the Deputy Ambassador, the Deputy British Ambassador here in Rome. Unfortunately, the Ambassador is away this week, but he also was delighted to hear just how many people were coming to this event and to lend his support to it. It's great to have you all here at the Villa Volkonsky. So for some of you, you will have been here before and know that this is our residence in Rome, our ambassador's residence that we are very, very proud of. For some of you, many of you, I expect it's the first time that you come here, so a particular welcome to you. We hope it's not the last time, and we hope to see you back again. It's great, particularly, to be surrounded this evening by such an impressive cast list of mainly female economists from the worlds of academia, business, and public policy. But I'm also delighted to see a lot of of male participants, of guests in the audience, because as we all know, these issues are maybe about women in economics, but they are not specific to women in economics, because bringing about equality is, of course, something for all of us. Special thanks goes to the delegations of students who've come from the Liceo Amaldi and Liceo Morgagni, as well as to all the students from the main Rome universities that have come to join us tonight. We're really glad to have you here, and we hope we can welcome you back again sometime in future. Some of you will know this, but to give you a little bit of context about this series, at the British Embassy in Rome, we've taken forward a series of workshops and roundtables focusing on women in various professions and walks of life, which have been traditionally dominated by men. That's starting to change, of course, but we like to think we're helping that to happen. So we've had, before now, events celebrating, looking at women in finance, women in politics, women in law, women in engineering, and most recently, women in green growth and women in public health. And our aim through these events has been to make real change happen, as I say, by raising awareness and opening up these conversations with men and women, women and men alike. So I really hope that by discussing experiences of women in economics and shared challenges in breaking the glass ceiling, to use the cliche, or bringing better equality and representation, we will inspire more women, more people from diverse backgrounds into careers in economics and other equivalent areas. As many of you will know, economics in both the UK and Italy, and probably a lot of other countries too, if that's the case, is an area dramatically underrepresented by women. But hopefully, by having more of these conversations, more of these events and get-togethers, there will come a day when we don't need to redress any balances, and we won't need to go out of our way to ensure that women are represented on panels and in different walks of life, because women and men and people from various other backgrounds will be represented in equal numbers, and numbers that are more representative of the populations in which we live. I'm not going to say any more. I confess to not being an economist, so I'm now going to hand over to people far better qualified to talk about this. Thank you again, and I hope you have a good evening.
Hello? Oh, hi, thanks. I don't have to do anything. Hi, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Amy Kasman, and I'm the Rome correspondent for the Financial Times, and it's a great honor to be here tonight with everybody and our great panel of speakers. I guess this is a great initiative by the British Embassy here. I'm the mother of a little girl who's here in the second row, and I can tell you that, you know, in the world there are a lot of initiatives to get children, even young children, to start thinking about careers that were not necessarily traditionally, you know, where a lot of women were encouraged to go. And on our bookshelf, we have a book called Rosie Revere, Engineer, and we have Ada Twist, Scientist. And these were, you know, stories for sort of picture books, which were aimed at getting kids to think about, getting girls to think about jobs that, you know, maybe were used to be thought of as boys' jobs. But I have yet to see the book that is trying to encourage young girls to think about economics as a career. Although one of our panelists has actually written one, but we haven't seen it, and we'll be hearing more about that soon. But basically, we have a great panel of three women. Professor Maria Savona, unfortunately, who was supposed to be here, is going to be joining remotely. So two are joining remotely. I'm not sure where they are when we'll start to see them. But we will start with Claire Lombardelli, who is coming from the Treasury and who's right here next to me. And I think we'd basically like to start by asking you to tell us when you first began to think about a career in economics, when you first began to consider that as a subject of interest, and why.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here tonight, so thank you very much for inviting me. Particularly great to see so many students. Great question. So I probably first started thinking about economics when I was a teenager, though I didn't know it was economics. I would say I was always very interested in sort of how the world works and why, but I didn't really know that was economics. You know, if you think about, I don't know, fairness, justice, inequality, the environment, these are all economic issues. And I guess like any teenager, I was sort of interested in that. And then I chose to study economics at university because I sort of learned over time that was the study of all these really interesting issues that basically explain how the world works, why the world works the way it does, you know, the fairnesses and unfairnesses in the world. So I guess it was sort of through my teenage years, and I thought the best way to learn about this stuff and be able to sort of participate in that was to go and study it. So as my undergraduate, I did impart economics.
And was there a certain focus area that you had on economics? If you were interested in questions of social justice and equality and kind of why things were the way they were, what direction did you go in terms of your study of economics?
I mean, I guess I would say when I first started studying, I was suddenly surprised that like everything was really interesting, because it really is a powerful tool to help you understand everything about the world. I guess the area that probably interested me most was what we call public economics. So actually, how can sort of policy and governments actually help people and solve some of the big problems that we see in society. And so I guess I was more interested in some of those distributional questions, the question of sort of market failure, and to use the technical term, and what policy can do to try and sort of solve that and correct that, whether that is, you know, helping people achieve better health outcomes, or it's ensuring that, you know, we think about the environment when we design how we make policy. And that sort of area, I guess, was what I was most interested in.
And as a young student in economics, I mean, were you aware of the many different directions that you could potentially go in terms of careers from you know, with an economics training?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer to that is no. I had no idea, if I'm honest, how interesting, diverse, fulfilling, rewarding a career in economics could be. I never really thought that, you know, studying it would lead to a route in which you can actually take part in all of these conversations and be part of, you know, advising, thinking about designing the solutions to all these problems. And that was something that as I got into work, I suddenly realized, like, there's a whole world out there of absolutely fascinating things you can do and be part of, and economics is a really good way into that.
And as you know, entered the workforce, you were drawn to a career in government. Did you ever consider other, you know, going in other directions, or were you always clear that you wanted to go into a career in government?
No, I wasn't. I'm one of those people who never really had a kind of career plan. I actually started at the central bank in the UK, so doing quite a bit more sort of what we call macroeconomics, more technical analysis, interest rates, exchange rates, that sort of thing. And then over time, I thought actually the things I'm really interested in, which, like I say, are about sort of how do you help people, you know, have better lives, whether those are sort of economically better or sort of more fulfilling and improve their well-being. Those are the questions that governments are basically answering. And so that's what drew me into working for government. And then once I started there, you suddenly realize the sort of range of things you can work on.
Is there anything that you feel the most proud of that you've done or worked on, or the thing that you found the most rewarding or fulfilling in terms of your personal work in all these years in government, that, you know, the project or the case that was just the one that is always, when you look back and say that was really something?
That's a really good question. I think there's probably two things that I would say, if I'm allowed to. So one is I did a lot of work on labour markets, labour market economics, which actually I found incredibly satisfying, because that is about actually how do you help, you know, people who are out of work get into work, and all the advantages that come from employment. And actually that's an area where we know that you can have a really big impact with quite small interventions on people's lives. As I've become sort of further in my career, and now I run what we call the Government Economic Service in the UK, the thing I'm most proud of actually is probably a scheme that we've brought in to encourage people who don't have degrees in economics to come and work in economics across the government and study for their degree while they're working. And I wouldn't have thought, you know, I would never have expected that's the sort of thing that I would find I'd get a load of pride out of. But actually, when you meet young people and see their sort of progression through economics, that is like just incredibly rewarding.
And what kind of backgrounds are those young people coming from that are in that program?
Yeah, a real mix actually, which is one of the best things about it, because you don't need to have a degree, and maybe we'll talk a bit about the importance of an economics degree, but quite a lot of people don't think to study a degree, so we've got a much wider range of people coming through that route, far more women than otherwise, and far more people from sort of lower socioeconomic backgrounds than you see in a typical kind of university economics course. So a much wider range.
And I want to ask you, I mean, as we discussed at the beginning, this is a field where women are, you know, massively underrepresented, maybe one of the last major bastions of men, although there are increasingly, you know, very high profile, very accomplished women in economics. And in my last posting in India, of course, you know, Geeta Gopinath was looked at as this kind of rock star of the economics world. But I mean, when you were starting out, did you feel that you had that you were taken seriously? Did you feel that you faced more resistance to your entry into the world? I mean, what are the attitudes? I mean, it's probably changed since you first entered, but maybe you could talk about any obstacles or any sense of discrimination that you may have faced when you first joined the workforce, how you maybe overcame that, and how you see the situation changing in the UK.
Sure. It's definitely changed a lot, I would say. And as you say, there are now, some of the biggest economics jobs in the world are now held by or have been held by women. You mentioned Gita, but, also the Federal Reserve Chair has been a woman. We've had women, the ECB is currently run by women. So some of the really kind of, like you say, rock stars of the profession. None of that was the case when I started just over 20 years ago. And actually, there were very few senior women in economics positions. There were a couple around, but, really very, very few. In terms of attitudes, I think I wouldn't say I've ever experienced direct discrimination. And I think there's pros and cons of being a woman in a world in which there aren't many women. But certainly what I have felt throughout is quite often you're in a room and you may be the only woman, or you might be one of a very small number of women. And quite often you find it's the attitudes of other people in the room that I think it's more people don't really expect you to be an economist, or they don't quite know how to sort of think about a woman as an economist. It's just not what they expect. And, I have had quite a bit of mansplaining. I don't know what the Italian phrase for that is, but I'm sure you have one. But I have had quite a bit of people, I think, just don't quite know what to do with you, feel they need to explain things to you, or don't necessarily think to include you in the conversation. So sort of a bit of having to sort of insert yourself into the conversation, which is very hard to do when you're very junior and the only woman in the room. It gets easier, I think, as you get more senior.
Do you have any tips for how you actually do that in a way that kind of is positive and doesn't just end up raising hackles? Because it is tricky, and mansplaining is a big problem in probably every field.
It is. I mean, a couple of things I would say. One thing I think is a real issue and challenge, actually, for a lot of people is confidence. So in that sort of environment, it can be hard to have the confidence to speak up. And so I think you have to really do things. One is sort of have confidence that you know what you're talking about, and you've done your homework, you know your brief. And so really be comfortable doing that. Actually, you're also kind of helping other people if you do that. Most people, they're not looking to exclude you, but if you put yourself forward, they will sort of encourage you to participate. So I would do that. I mean, unless it's very kind of aggressive, I wouldn't necessarily call it out. Just, patiently state your view, be polite, sort of in a sense take the kind of moral high ground in that position, and just, realize you are there for a reason, take part in that meeting as an equal to the others.
I guess a lot of what happens in some of these meetings, the dynamics are not necessarily that, as you say, someone deliberately wants to exclude you or someone is against women as an economist, but more that they're not quite sure how to deal with you, or, because you're very young, they're not quite taking you seriously. And I mean, it's a bit more subconscious than kind of. But do you think that, I would presume that has changed a lot as more and more women are entering the field?
Yeah, I think that's right. Like you said, I think there is a little bit of sort of unconscious bias in there, and that people feel more comfortable with people like themselves. So, you can walk into, I spend a lot of time in, rooms with a lot of, for example, middle-aged men. They may all know each other. They certainly will quite often feel quite comfortable together. I think things have definitely changed quite a lot. I was talking at an event earlier, when I joined the Bank of England, as it then was in the early 2000s, there were very few women doing economics posts at all. And I remember, for example, I used to dress like a man. I mean, I wasn't conscious of it, but I look back, I wore a black trouser suit and a white shirt. Apart from the tie, I was basically, I was trying to sort of go incognito somehow. It's ridiculous. When you look around this room now, and you look around actually at all those sorts of things, women are much more comfortable being themselves. And I think that is really important, and actually sends a really important signal.
I remember all those kind of man suits for women, and anyway, bye-bye, good riddance. I'd like to try to bring some of our other speakers in. Are they there? Are they here? Are they with us? Can we? Hi, there you are. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Can you hear
great.
me?
Hi, yes, Maria and Simona, can we
Hello,
hear you?
Amy.
Can we hear you?
Hi, yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, loud and clear.
Fantastic. There you are. I'm really glad to see both of you. Thank you very much for joining us. Simona, I feel like I'd like to next start with you. I'd like to put to you the same question that I put to Claire, which is if you could tell us a little bit about when your interest in economics first began to develop and how you decided in which direction that you were going to go.
First of all, buonasera, good evening. Thank you for the invite. And I'm sorry I cannot be with you in person, but I am right now in the Middle East. Whenever I do events like this, I wish I could come to you and say, well, I had an epiphany when I was 6, and then I knew exactly what I wanted to do, and I wanted to be an economist. Unfortunately, my story is far from it. I became an economist, and I ended up in finance largely by accident, including my very first job, which was in a hedge fund. I was selected largely based on my numerical skills, IQ test, and very embarrassingly, the moment they offered me a job, I had to diplomatically really ask what they were doing. So as you can see, career planning in my case was very little planning. Having said this, when I look back at my career, it's very clear that while I didn't have clarity on any particular sort of job that I wanted to do, I was always driven by 3 key pillars and very sort of rooted personal values and beliefs. And they were, first of all, intellectual curiosity. For me, it has always been absolutely critical that anything that I do helps me learn. And I'm an endless student. So whether I am doing my day job in finance, whether I'm sort of teaching, for me, it's all about actually learning. And that is something that keeps me alive and gives me an awful lot of energy. The second key driver was to be a global citizen. I've always been very curious. I've always wanted to travel. And so it was always very important for me that whatever career I did, it had to give me the opportunity to work and live in many different countries. And I feel extremely privileged that throughout my career I've been able to work for a long time in the UK, but also in the US and in APAC. I see that as a major advantage professionally and personally. And the third component is a sense of purpose and impact. I mean, on a similar line to what Claire was saying, for me, it's always been important that my job had an impact. And so when I look at what I do together with my team day in and day out, we manage money to ensure that people can retire, that can send their kids to college. And that fills me with a very strong sense of purpose. So the bottom line is, I never did career planning in any traditional sense, but I've always been very aware of what matters to me as a person. And that has been a key driver of anything that I've done in the last 25 years of my career.
Can you tell us a little bit about a bit more about the kind of work that you do in finance? And when you say you manage money, I mean, can you tell us a little bit about what it consists of? I mean, we have a lot of students here, so maybe you could kind of explain to them a bit about what it's about.
Sure. So I'm the chief investment officer of a division of an asset management company. And in very simple terms, what we do, we have the privilege of managing money on behalf of clients that trust us with their finances to fulfill their dreams, their long-term objectives. Effectively, as an economist working in investment, what you tend to do is really to focus on, number one, where is the economy going? What's your view on, for example, what's going to happen to inflation? What's going to happen to growth? And you do that very often on a sort of global scale. And then you ask yourself the question, how much of that view is already in the price of the stock market or of bonds or currency? And based on that, you then make allocation decision. You allocate capital with the hope that this will indeed appreciate it within a reasonable amount of risk taking. So it's interesting because in many respects, investments brings together a number of the different dimensions of economics. Both sort of the macro element, but also the micro elements, because very often economists working in finance also look at specific companies, so that's much more micro. And of course, a lot of the quantitative skills that come with economics. So personally, I came through the quantitative side of economics, so I'm an econometrician, I did sort of game theory. And even my interest right now in an academic sense is I teach a course at Cambridge University, which is all about artificial intelligence applied to sort of economics and finance. So I think that the key takeaway is literally that economics is really broad. And because it's so broad, it lends itself to a lot of very different applications, but also to people that may have different skill sets. So there is a lot of variety and diversity in economics, which I think is brilliant.
Okay, Simona, I'm going to come back to you, but I'm going to bring Maria in at this point, if we can see her. Maria, I hope you can hear me.
I can hear you, yes, Sammy.
Great.
I don't know if you can.
Okay.
Can you?
Yeah. So I guess I'd like to ask you the same kind of starting question. Can you tell us a bit about how you were first drawn to, study economics? What inspired you about it? And, how you kind of came to decide that that was the area you wanted to work in, and at what point that took place, and kind of what it was that gripped you intellectually about it.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks, everyone. And thanks for bearing with me for being remotely joining. This is a great question. And I think I have the main driver and a confession to do. The main driver is that I've always been convinced that economics was the one thing to understand how the world moves. That's the main point. And I think when I started, and it was mostly interesting, a little bit like Claire, about issues of inequality, of labor, and so on. And this is the main thing that drew me into economics in the first place. The confession is also that when I started studying economics in the first degree, I actually studied in Rome, in La Sapienza. The one thing was that probably was also trying to carve my own path, because I had a family, the whole of my family was in law, and I thought that it was a good way to particularly the things that I've been doing later on, and I think
Sorry,
that
Maria?
I have to.
Sorry,
Yeah, can you hear me?
we lost you there for a moment. Maybe we lost you just at the point where you said, all your family was in law, and then you thought that ... and we didn't quite get it. Sorry, there was a
sorry
tech
about
glitch.
my connection. I thought that was one way to carve my own path, intellectual path. That was the sort of little teenager things that was behind it. And I never regretted for 1 second. I think that this was completely, that was the thing that allowed me to go into topics that I loved it, and also carve my own path in something that at the time wasn't really in the economics profession, I would say. When I started studying economics of technical change, and I became an economist of innovation, that was at the time something that was a sort of niche within the niche. And that was particularly interesting for me to get into that. But this opened up a little bit more of issues with respect to the topic of tonight.
So you became an economist as a teenage rebel. I think that's the kind of revolution that a lot of parents could very happily get behind. And can you tell us a bit more about what you study? You're a professor, you're in the academic sector. Why did you decide, first of all, to go to the academic sector? And can you tell us about studying the economics of innovation?
Yeah, I think one of the main reasons is that I was lucky enough to have great mentors that I held in great esteem, and that's something that, and intellectual curiosity was something that really was underpinning my decisions. Now, the question why I ended up doing economics of technical change, it's something that I still wonder, and I think one of the issues at the time was that it wasn't particularly in the economics profession. So being an economist, a profession wouldn't include economics of technical change. So this was a particularly difficult choice as well. But I thought at the same time that that particular topic, or the way of approaching world economics, I mean, even the effect of technical change on labor markets and how global economy was going, was required that particular approach that wasn't at the time in the economics profession. Nowadays is a little bit different, so that's something that it's interesting for me to see the evolution of the topic at the moment. And this is something that also created a little bit of idiosyncrasy, I would say, because I was an economist when I moved to the UK to do my PhD. I was in a department that wasn't particularly a department of economics, so I had the opportunity to interact with several disciplines, including history of economics, engineers, anthropologists, sociologists, and so on. So I was a woman economist in a department that I'll tell you more if you wish.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Can you still hear me?
Yeah, yes, thank you. There's a little bit of technical problems, so, but I think we got the point. I guess I'd like to ask you, as a last question before I go back to Simona, about whether how you have felt, okay, two questions actually. Number one, we hear a lot, you're someone who's studying technology, we hear a lot about how technology is gonna bring a lot of jobs, see a lot of jobs replaced. This is a question for Maria. Technology is going to see a lot of jobs phased out, and we're going to, it's going to change the labor market. A lot of jobs are going to disappear as we're all replaced by AI. We hear that sometimes even in the journalism field. I'm convinced that I will not be replaced by a robot, at least in my lifetime, but I'm not very sure about people that come after me. I hope not. But how about in the field of economics? Is AI, what's AI going to do to change job opportunities in economics? Are there going to be fewer jobs, more jobs? How do you see AI and technology changing the field of economics as a profession and career path?
That's $1 million question, Amy. But I'm with you. I'm with you of being an optimist, saying that, for example, I was reflecting upon the role of ChatGPT 3, which I'm sure you've all heard
Oh dear.
about, and I think for the moment we still have a role. So I think the main important thing, and which goes back to the main motivation of starting studying economics, is how this is impacting probably the most vulnerable of the labor markets. And this is something that that it would be important to study at large. And this is exactly what my research interest is at the moment. So.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to turn back to Simona. And Simona, I said at the beginning that, on my daughter's bookshelf is Rosie Revere, engineer, Ada Twist, scientist. Why don't you tell us about your children's book, which I believe is inspiring young girls. I unfortunately didn't get a chance to see the book before the talk, but why don't you tell us about it? What's it called? What inspired you to write it? And what are the messages in that book?
Thank you. So I think let me perhaps take a step back. Why writing? I think this goes back to the point of a very strong sense of purpose. I've always felt very strongly that it was important for people like me to give back. I am where I am also thanks to scholarship that I've been on since the age of 14. And so I've always been motivated in anything that I did in my sort of so-called extracurriculum activity to also help out in the same way as I've had the benefit to help out. So a big part of writing was to provide positive messages, but also to anything that I've ever made out of books was always given out to charity. In terms of the book for children, I've always tried to find that niche. I've written 2 that have been published, and I've always tried to find that niche between being creative and at the same time delivering some technical concepts. So the first one is called The Kids' Pocket Guides to the World, and it's really about explaining globalization through fairy tales. And that is targeted to children in the 8 to 12 range. And then more recently, through a collaboration, I've written a book in Italian that for me was quite a change, because while I'm a native Italian speaker, I haven't been using Italian in any sort of technical context for a very long time. And so I wrote with a very accomplished Italian writer, Pier Domenico Baccalario, a book entitled in Italian, A cosa servono i soldi? And that is for all children, but also adults, because my father claims that through that book he has finally understood what I did. But it's basically about explaining what's money for, what's the market, and why at the end of the day we are all economic agents. And I think this really matters for today's discussion, because sometimes economics may come across as a very abstract subject, and the same applies to finance. But the reality is that economics and finance are things that touch everybody in their everyday life. So I think it's very important that collectively there is more of an effort to bring economics, to bring finance, and generally technical subjects closer to people, because they matter and we all have a role to play.
Thank you, Simona. I'd like to ask a couple of last questions to kind of all the panelists and have them weigh in on this, which is, I think, we all know that for women considering careers, one of the key questions that many will think about is how does this career, how will it match with kind of the work-life balance, basically. And it's funny because I was recently interviewing women in the wine industry who were raving about their work-life balance, and I thought it sounded rather idyllic. But I would like to take all of your views on kind of the challenges of being a woman in your field. I mean, it's not so much about economics in general, but in the specific sector that you're in, finance, the academic sector, the government sector, and how each of these might affect sort of work-life balance for, women in the field at this point in time. And then I'd also like to ask you, I mean, we're not an exclusively female audience here in this room, and if you have any advice to men that that want to kind of create a more welcoming environment to women in the field and encourage women, if there's any thoughts about like what needs to be done. So maybe Claire, I'll start with you on this.
Sure, I guess. So let me take those 2 in turn. So on work-life balance, I mean, look, I work for the government in the UK, and that is a relatively good place to work in terms of sort of work-life balance, particularly if you're going to have a family and the like, as in, better than some sectors. Not as good as it could be and not as good as it should be, but in general, the rights and the sort of, that's pretty well respected. We've still got quite a long way to go, and you can see that. And when people take time out to have children, then when they come back, managing the time, the amount of time you spend in work and the amount of time you spend with your children is an endless challenge, and we've got a lot more we can do around things like how do you do part-time working in a way that allows people to have very productive careers, how do you do job sharing so that people still get all of the opportunities that allow for advancement and promotion. And so we've got a long way to go, but in general, you know, it is an environment that is more positive and more supportive of work-life balance than others. And I would say the change that I've really seen over my career is actually how much men are taking advantage of that as well. So we get a lot of men taking time out for shared parental leave, and actually that is good because both it allows them to spend time with their young children, but also it enables everyone to see the benefits of that, and so they become much more supportive of their female colleagues doing the same. So, you know, relatively good. On the question of how can men be allies and how can men help create the environment, I think that's absolutely critical. And actually, you know, you can see this changing as well over time, which is, and it's not just about gender, that is about actually how can everyone, men and women, create an environment that feels very inclusive to everyone, whatever their background, and that could be about socioeconomics, it could be about ethnic diversity, it could be about gender, but really the workplace is changing to become a place where actually it feels much more inclusive to everyone, and a place where everyone wants to be part of a workplace that everyone can feel they belong in. And so I think that is changing. There's a lot further to go, but I think as we have this discussion more, you can see that sort of changing over time. But it's important, you know, we always say this, but this is an issue not just for women, but for men as well.
I think it's a very good point what you make about the, you know, male parental leave, because I remember for ages feminists saying like male parental leave isn't, you know, parental leave isn't just something for women, and that if men start taking parental leave, then employers will not just look at women and say, oh God, the minute you get pregnant, you're going to be on leave, because a man's wife could get pregnant and then he could go on leave too, and it just kind of neutralizes the whole thing. So anyway, I'd like to turn to Simona and Maria again. I mean, do you have anything to say on this topic? I mean, how is the world of high finance for the work-life balance, and how about academia? Simona, why don't you go first?
So I would echo a lot of the comments that Claire has made, in particular around the fact that the environment is becoming more and more focused on making sure that there is that balance and the level of flexibility that is necessary to have that balance. I would also highlight the point that work-life balance is not just a matter of allowing people to be parents, but also, I mean, throughout our life, there might be different things. We might need to take care of elderly parents, for example. We may want to do other things to study. So I think it's this notion of flexibility, particularly in a world where working life is going to expand and is going to evolve, because we're all going to do more jobs than it was the case for our parents. I think that element of flexibility, of balance, of reinventing itself is going to be a bigger and bigger theme. In terms of the advice, which I would give to, in particular in this case, though, to women, is always maintain a very positive mindset as you go through this process. So what I think is always think that this is possible. Always start from that standpoint that yes, there are challenges, but there are also opportunities. So I think a positive mindset is critical in everything that you do, including combining the many different dimensions of one's life.
Okay, and I'll bring this question also to Maria. Academia in terms of work-life balance.
Can you hear me, Amir?
Yes, we can,
yeah?
for now.
Brilliant. Well, I think academia is one of the worst sectors for work-life balance. I think, well, at least I've seen this across the UK and Italy. I think that there is this myth that academia is something vocational, and therefore is something that you do for passion and so on, and work expands a lot, and also because you deal with students and you don't want to you want to care for them and so on. So it's quite difficult to find a right work-life balance. It's also a sector that allows more flexibility, I think, possibly. So I guess it's a sort of individual choice to make that work-life balance in academia. I think it's quite idiosyncratic with respect to other sectors. And in terms of advice, I find myself at this stage of career, and I think it's something that probably Claire and Simona would align to be a sort of scarce resources. I mean, there are very few women in economics, and there are very few women in some particular topics, as I said. So I think when we are involved, put it directing institutions or having, being the editors of top-ranked journals or for every kind of role they find for us, we should make sure that we actually have a voice in deciding the direction of places and not make this as a facade.
Okay, I'm afraid we've lost Maria again. And that might actually be, no, there you are.
Sorry, did you hear me?
Yeah, did you just want to wrap up that thought? It shouldn't be a facade?
Yeah, no, that's all. That's the same. So I think that's let's make this valuable and inclusive in real terms. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Sorry for the technical problem.
Fantastic. Okay, so I think this is a topic that we could talk on and on about, but we have run out of time, and we've got another fantastic panel with 3 other economists waiting to answer your specific questions. So I think it falls to me now simply to thank our panelists, Claire Lombardelli and the other 2, Maria and Simone, and thank you, there you are, and thank you very much for joining us tonight. It's been very interesting, and I hope that all the members of the audience will have been, inspired by your ideas and experiences. And thank you very much for your attention, and now I hand over back to Pierluigi.
Okay, so hi again. We're now back on stage with 3 new panelists, very distinguished economists working for different organizations between the UK and Italy. As you may have noticed, all our panelists have this in common, that they represent in a way bridges between our 2 countries, and this is something that we really like to stress every time we do what we call bilateral events, showing the tight links and the ties between our 2 countries, in particular based and thanks to the people that work between the UK, British people working in Italy, Italian people working in the UK. This is something that is incredible, in particular if you consider, for example, that almost 600,000 to 700,000 Italians have made the UK their home. So here we are with the second panel with Magda Bianco, Head of Consumers Protection and Financial Education at the Bank of Italy. Welcome, Magda. Then we have Sandra Sequeira. Sandra is Associate Professor of Development Economics at the London School of Economics. Welcome, Sandra. And then we have Jeannie Dupasquier. Jeannie is Managing Director at the Fondazione Ortigia Business School, which is based in Sicily, in beautiful Siracusa, and it draws the name from Ortigia in Siracusa. So as mentioned before, and thank you very much to all the students and non-students that have put their questions in the fishbowl. I've got a few here, and I thought there were already quite many of them. Can you bring them? But then loads of others probably have been put, which I will try and look at in a moment. But let me start by asking three very basic questions to Magda, Sandra, and Jeannie. Just to introduce yourself in a couple of minutes, to describe, and I will start with Magda first from the Bank of Italy. Just to describe in a couple of minutes what your role is within your organization. And second question I have is what you would you describe in your career path so far as the most surprising event or episode that you have gone through?
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you very much. It's such a pleasure being here. I have come here a few other times, and I find it always so welcoming and pleasant, so thanks a lot. One word about what I do. I am responsible, as you were saying, for a department which deals with consumer protection, financial consumer protection. So I sort of try to defend consumers from banks' behavior. Sometimes it's not easy, but we do it with a lot of enthusiasm, and financial education. So we deal with programs for kids and for adults to increase their level of financial education, and maybe we will talk about this later.
Your presence here with so many students.
Yeah, we do believe it's very, very relevant, and if there are questions about this, I will be very pleased to answer, because we do believe this is really part of an education today. It's essential for a better life in general, but also to be a more aware citizen in our society. You need to have some basic knowledge to really make more relevant, more aware choices. Something unexpected. Well, I work in a central bank, so I don't have many surprises in terms of very exciting things. Maybe the thing that surprised me most was some years ago. I used to work at the research department before this work, and at some point I received a proposal by the Minister of Justice, who asked me to become economic advisor for the Minister of Justice. And I was really surprised because I didn't know her. It was a she. And she told me that she got to know me basically in a conference that we organized as research department after a really big, I think, research project on gender issues, on women in the Italian economics. At the end of this project, which I coordinated with other colleagues, we did this big conference, which was, I think, a major success. We enjoyed it a lot. And I think it was one of the first really big research on this issue in Italy. It was something like 2012, so a lot of time ago. And she was invited, she assisted to it, and she said that she was impressed with the content and how things were dealt with, and she proposed me to become her economic advisor from that.
Did you accept?
I was really shocked.
Did you accept in the end?
I did.
Oh, right.
I did.
Very good. I didn't know.
For a couple of years, part-time. It was an amazing experience.
Yeah.
I think I would consider her one of my mentors. And it affected also my work afterwards within the central bank, because I worked in another public sector area, in another minister, and it was very, very interesting. But it was really, well, shocking.
Economics of justice sounds interesting, like a topic for a future event.
Absolutely, I can
Chris
tell you a lot
Novella.
about this.
Huh?
It's
Why not?
very relevant
Okay.
as well.
Very good, thank you very much. Sandra, same question to you. So what's your role as a associate professor? What do you teach? Development economics.
Yes, so unsurprisingly.
And what's the most surprising episode, maybe linked to something that your students did or not?
Or maybe I'll talk about my career path, actually.
Okay.
I was inspired by what I was hearing from the previous panelists. First of all, thank you very much for having me here. I am not Italian, but I consider myself an honorary Italian, loving the language and the culture for many years. And so maybe I'll start by sharing with you a bit of my path. So I think a common theme tonight, we heard from Claire, from Simone as well, that there wasn't a lot of career planning and ending up being an economist.
In my case, I was quite set on what I wanted to do with my life. So when I was in college, I was convinced that my main goal was to pursue a diplomatic career with the United Nations. And so I studied economics because I thought it would give me some grounding to be able to do so. And then I enrolled in a 2-year master's program in the US. It was the oldest school of diplomacy in the US at the time. And I wanted to study law and diplomacy. It happened to be a 2-year program, which meant that between my first year and my second year in the program, I had a summer where I could go and get some work experience. And so I felt that I should start getting that work experience with one of the UN agencies. Now, at the time, it was very rare that you could get any type of position as a research assistant or as a research officer for such a short period of time. These are very bureaucratic organizations. And yet, I tried to talk to as many people as I could, and I sent about probably 180 emails globally to all UN agencies, from UNICEF to UNDP to UNHCR. And I got 3 responses that were positive, so 3 out of 180. And I selected one that took me to Lima, to Peru, and I was working with the World Bank during that summer. And I was asked to primarily do an assessment of all the projects that the bank was financing at the time, ranging from judicial reform to formalization of shanty towns and ensuring that people had access to property rights in these areas. And I quickly realized that as much as I enjoyed the high-level meetings and the debates and writing the reports, what I really loved the most was to lock up my office and to go to the field and talk to people, to understand where the data were coming from and have a much deeper understanding of the challenges associated with all these projects. And so that's what I did. And even though I had already jumped through all the hoops, it took me a year to jump through all the hoops in the UN system, through all the exams, the interviews, being placed on rosters, and getting postings. I came back after that summer with a completely different goal. I quickly applied to some PhDs, and I decided that academia would give me the type of intellectual freedom and the time that I wanted to be able to think about these deep issues, to be able to study them, to generate my own data in the field, to generate new ideas, and to also try to have some policy impact. And so that completely changed my career strategy. And again, I think the main message for me was to not let very rigid goals kind of get in your way. So to be adaptive, your preferences will change. Your horizon will be just shifting destinations as you go on in your lives. And so this for me was quite unexpected.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Very, very interesting and hopefully inspiring for those who would like to enroll in a career in economics. And Jeannie, tell us about your story.
My turn.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you on my side for inviting me as well and for such an interesting and inspiring discussion so far. Okay, I'm managing director of Fondazione Ortigia. Fondazione Ortigia has been created 6 years ago by economist Lucrezia Reiklin, and she wanted to bring executive education and inspiration to the territory of southern Italy to develop the human capital in the area. So what we do is we do managerial executive education courses to companies in the south of Italy, but also programs for students in university and in the secondary school. About my story, I graduated in economics at Bocconi University, and in the early stages of my career, I always felt that I was judged and my successes depended on my competencies and abilities. I never felt different as a woman compared to, my peers. Until when? Until I became a mother, until I got pregnant. So I was working in the consulting sector, and when I returned from maternity, I noticed a change in the attitude my company had toward me in the terms of they felt like they lost confidence in my ability to focus on the job and on my commitment. And when I tell about this story, I always say it was kind of a paternalistic approach, not a discriminatory. It was a paternalistic approach because my employer felt that he knew what was better for me at the time. So being a young mother of a young kid, my employer thought that it was good for me to be more involved with my family and less involved in complex projects or important clients that could take me out of my family, right? So this awareness was kind of a cold shower for me at the time, because really brought me the awareness that there is a long road ahead of us to really reach gender equality in the workplace. So my reaction at that time was, yes, first to fight to get back all my clients and my important project. But after a certain amount of time, I decided to go out from the company and really start working on the topic of gender equality and to bring this topic into companies as an independent professional and then bring it in every aspect of the work that I have been doing since then. So also at the Fondazione Artigia now we have a lot of programs aiming in particular to young women in the south of Italy that maybe we'll have the chance to discuss in a minute.
Absolutely, which is the Artigia Business School.
Yeah, that is the Fondazione Artigia.
And yeah, the Fondazione Artigia, we will have somebody talking about that experience in a moment. Okay, great. Thank you very much for these quick presentations. I know there is a lot of other things that you would be happy to share with us, but let's use the format of questions from the floor. And I have received a huge number of questions, including late ones, which I struggled to read while trying to hear what you were saying. But now, probably what we didn't say is that those who wrote questions would be invited to ask their question, to stand up and ask questions if we have another microphone. Of course, this is not obligatory. And if Leonardo Santori wouldn't want to read or to ask the question himself, have we got another extra microphone? There you go, it's coming. Leonardo, yeah. Do you remember the question you wrote down, yes?
Yes.
Very good.
Sort of.
And your question was open to the three, so we will have quick answers because we've got lots of questions. Leonardo, thank you very much for your participation.
Yes. If you have a time machine and you have the possibility to go back through time and talk with your the younger yourself, what advice would you give to her to start this journey and reach success?
So, an advice to your younger self with the knowledge and the experience acquired in these few years. So what would you say? Let's start with Jeannie.
To me, a big part of the motivation I have in my job is the purpose. So my advice would be to look for a job that you really believe in, that has a meaning for you, that resonates with your values. I experienced in my first part of my career, I didn't take this into consideration, but then I understand that this is a big part of my motivation. So if you link success to happiness, if you see what I mean, in my case, I link it in a way. So I really like to do something that motivates me every morning because I can have an impact, I can do something useful for other people, and this is, for me, the best motivation. So that would be something that I would give, an advice I will give to my younger self.
Great, thank you very much. Jeannie, Sandra.
So in my case, I would say confidence is key. I think along the way I made it sound that all these shifts in my career were easy. They weren't. But I think I now have the career that I love. So I'm both an academic, but all my research projects are designed with policy partners or with private sector partners, so that I can straddle both worlds and I can ensure that some of my research findings have policy impact. But I wasn't confident that it was going to work out this way. And I think along the way, particularly for women, I can speak for academia at least, it's incredibly important to stay confident throughout, that you can make it, that you can have children and still make tenure, that you can progress and be promoted to full professor. So I think that for sure is one thing that I would like to instill as many young women out there, is being extremely confident on your capabilities and that things will work out in the end. The second issue would be networking. So I do think that networking is key. It's something that women have more trouble doing for a variety of reasons. It's important to get out there. It's important to meet people, to talk to people as much as your male colleagues do. Sometimes, Claire mentioned this as well, that there are natural male networks and coalitions that are formed. Women often have a hard time breaking into those networks for a variety of reasons, even more so if they have a family. But again, it's a second point that I think I wish I had done more of, and earlier as well. So if I'm completely honest, that's the advice I would like to pass on.
Thank you, Sandra. Magda, over to you.
I think something similar to what Sandra said about confidence. The same for me. I mean, working in a mainly male environment, especially when young, you feel you have to listen. Maybe you are wrong, maybe actually they are right, so you should wait before speaking. And well, I would suggest myself not to wait so much, to risk a bit more, that maybe actually what you say is not wrong, or is as wrong as the others. And secondly, don't try to imitate the style in terms of participating in context, even leadership style that you observe, which were at the time mainly men's style, because a different style brings something, brings well, diversity. So you shouldn't really adapt to the environment, but bring your own identity, your own different views. Maybe at the beginning it's a bit difficult, but then this brings value for everybody, for yourself and for the others. So that's
great. Thank you very much. Be brave and be yourself as a woman. Yeah. Just to sum up, Annalisa asked an interesting question. Who are you, Annalisa? Would you like asking the question? Here you are. Annalisa, okay, the microphone is on its way.
Okay, thank you for listening me this question. I'm an academic too. I'm a mathematician working in economics, and with my colleagues we try to understand a little bit more about our role in academics and in economics. So this question, just to give you the background of the question. So this question starts from an anecdotic example. If we look at the Nobel Prizes, just 2 women were awarded by Nobel Prizes. And the topics of these Nobel Prizes are, let's say, a little bit different from the classical topics of others. So it's more directed to social justice, to equality, let's say, not so strongly inspired by the utilitarian principle that usually we teach to our students in academics. So I just give you this observation, and I want to share this observation with you and ask what you think about what we can infer from this.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Annalisa. Very well put, I think. Can we infer anything about Nobel Prizes for women being awarded for equality, social justice, rather than strong, hardcore economy. Magda, you've got the microphone. Sorry, we're short of microphones here, but we'll do the best with what we have.
I'll start, but I guess Sandra has a lot to think about that. Yes, Nobel Prizes were given, yes, to Esther Duflo and before Elizabeth Ostrom. I think that comes from, first, an objective thing, that there are fewer women in monetary economics, in finance, in the, say, hard areas. It's what actually we observe as a central bank trying to recruit women, that we have, a sort of plateau. We don't get beyond 30% of women, even if we do a lot to get more women as economists. So the question, in my view, goes before. It's similar to the question of women going less into STEM topics. And I think it really goes to the early childhood somehow. So it's, I think, stereotypes first, and hence culture. It goes to, at least I think, in Italy, but maybe in some countries, I guess this is changing, how math is taught. I think it really creates a gender gap since when they're kids, because the way it's taught, it's, I don't know how to say it, somehow competitive. It creates competition. And we know women are less prone to competition, at least if we don't address this issue somehow positively. So at least these two areas, competition and hence math and the way math is taught, stereotypes, of course, and then there might be other issues like, the fact that women choose in general more humanities versus math and also finance and so on, which should be properly analyzed. I think it also depends on in which fields they do slightly better than boys. They typically do slightly better or better in humanities than math, but sometimes they do in absolute level better than in math than boys. But since they typically choose in a relative way, I am a bit better in humanities, so I do humanities, that then creates the gap in the entire path. So I don't know whether I've been clear, but these are my thoughts.
No, I would completely agree. I think there's a US economist, Claudia Golden, who has devoted several decades of her career to trying to understand the source of the gender gap in general in society, but she's looked also specifically in academia. And she has documented that this is true. So women tend to not go into finance, into macroeconomics, and other of the considered hard fields for a variety of reasons. One is that they have fewer role models. There are fewer teachers and professors who will be supervisors to these students. The second one is also that this has been documented that when girls tend to get a bad grade in economics in their first 101 economics course, that they tend to quit, and what they infer, they overreact to that bad grade, and then they go into humanities and they go into other sciences, but they stay away from these harder subjects. And so again, it comes down to confidence, to understanding that that may be one grade out of many. So generally boys, students, they don't respond that way. They just continue and they do their degrees in economics. And so this is a cycle that needs to be broken. So there needs to be a lot more confidence for women to go into these fields. And these are fields that carry a huge premium, as Magda was saying, in terms of employment, even financially, that if you go into a finance sector versus if you go into development economics or something else. And we need more role models. We need just girls to feel more confident that they can study these harder subjects. Having said that, maybe I'll just add a little anecdote that you mentioned the Nobel Prize winners. So Esther Duflo indeed was the first woman economist to actually get the Nobel Prize in economics, and she got it with her husband, Abhijit Banerjee. And he was one of my co-authors, and so I got contacted by a journalist when they won. And they went on what do you think about the Nobel Prize this year and gender? What do you have to say about that? And I immediately stepped forward and started defending Esther. And I said, Esther is an amazing scholar. She's an amazing researcher. She's transformed the lives of so many students and getting more and more women to work in development, until he stopped me and said, no, I'm not talking about Esther. What I mean is, now that we have a woman who got it, why did her husband have to win it as well? and I thought, to me, that was also quite striking, because I know Abhijit's work very well, and they've co-produced what they have done together in terms of the Poverty Action Lab. They've been hugely influential. And so, again, we want to keep this balance, that it's not a zero-sum game, in the sense that once we reward women for their work, that we also continue to reward men for it. So I thought that might be something to add at this point.
Great. Any thought from you, Jeannie?
Yes, I totally agree on what has been said. Maybe just to add, that there are a lot of research that also say there is a peer-to-peer kind of influence. So in monogender schools, girls are proven to perform better in math, whether in monogender male school, male perform less better. So men perform better when there is the mixed gender, women perform better when there is a monogender classes. So I also think that this has an impact in why they tend to choose some subjects compared to others.
This is interesting because you mentioned the role of men as well. While I was looking at the next questions from, this is a group question, collective questions by students of Lewis University here in Rome. I'm not sure whether you have appointed a spokesperson to ask the question. Guys, is there anyone who is brave enough to stand up and ask the question? Thank you. Try.
Can you hear me? Yeah, my question was, how do you think men should be involved, like in the workplace or generally in promoting gender equality?
Very good. Thank you very much. Jeannie, we
start
on doing
hear.
this like,
Can you,
so the role of men in fostering gender balance in the workplace.
Yeah, I mean, this is key, absolutely key element. I think men need to become alive because we need to free them. Women, in a way, are already free to express who they are, more than men, because men tend to adhere to a certain stereotype of a male leadership model that nowadays is still very much the alpha man type of model. So I think that many men don't feel represented by that model. So the discussion around gender equality, I think it's, of course, I mean, in the favor of having more women in the workplace, but also in having more male leadership style in the workplace. And as someone said before, in order to have workplaces that are more inclusive of every person, you know, the different type of women and a different type of men, not a single success style model. Yeah. Sorry if I got a little bit.
Yeah, no, it's okay, great. Sandra, any quick thought on this key topic? And I'm speaking as a man.
Sure. So I think, you know, I've had many women champions in my life. I've had many men champions as well in my life. And so being able to support women at the right time, particularly as they're going maybe life transitions, such as having children, is really critical. And fortunately, I've worked with many colleagues who, whenever I needed them to step up to share the work because I was having a child, that they did so. And so I think it's important for them to enable women to have flexibility, to be able to have some periods where they work part-time, periods where they work remotely, and making sure that everyone understands that these are not one-off games, these are repeated games. So now they can help us, we will help them in the future when they also have children and would like to take some parental leave. And so I think in terms of work balance is this understanding that it's not a balance that you achieve every day, it's hard, and I think it's more of a long-term game. So in the long run you can achieve the balance, probably not in the short one, but men play a crucial role in just creating this enabling environment for women to also be able to thrive.
Right, thank you.
Well, difficult to add to this, but I think one thing is that they should first address, somehow recognize implicit biases. We all have them. Yeah. Gender biases, sometimes we don't recognize them. Men, well, but also women, of course, sometimes don't recognize. This is more common in, say, older generation. So this would be the first step. Try to understand what they are and somehow at least become aware and somehow address them. I think they are very important, of course, when they are in leadership positions, top positions, which are still mainly in male hands. I see that there are somehow differences among men who are, well, father of female daughters, especially when they enter the world market. They become really more aware of some of the difficulties, so it's easier in a sense. What I see is that in younger men who are also bosses, at least in my experience, things are really much easier. I think the culture is changing, actually. They feel really at the same level. They do understand. They exchange roles also within the family much more easily, so I have great hopes.
That's uplifting for men. One question that was addressed specifically to you, and so I will try, because we've got so many questions and not all the evening for this interesting debate, I will start picking questions for individual panelists. And Agnese wanted to ask a question about the complexity of the subject, economics. Agnese. Try.
Okay, works.
Yeah, thanks.
I wanted to ask, so economics seems like a very difficult field, and some people can feel a bit, intimidated by the complexity of the issue. And I wanted to know, like, in your opinion, what are the ways in which we can teach this subject matter in a more simpler way, also to encourage more women and more young people to participate in this field.
Thank you, Agnese.
So the question is, this is a difficult field, how can we address it in a, okay, so it is certainly a difficult field, as many others, I would say. It's not the only difficult one. It's difficult, I would say, for the general public, because there are studies about this, about how difficult it is to teach economics at the general public who is not, studying every day intensely and deeply the topic, because somehow, as other topic like physics, it has sometimes complex relationships. There is not, one action that leads to a result or one agent who is responsible for the result, but there are complex interconnections that are sometimes not obvious, not immediate. We say among economists that the theory of comparative advantages is one of the most difficult in terms of it's unusual, it's not immediate in its understanding. So this is to say that for the general public sometimes it's difficult to understand the basics of economics, but there are certainly ways in which we can make it more easily transmissible. And I would say this is the effort that we economists have to do, and it is possible. We do programs on financial education exactly with this idea in mind, that we can transfer the basics of finance, what is needed actually for each of us, in a very or reasonably simple way and even fun way for people to understand. Of course, this requires an effort on our side because we economists tend to have somehow the pleasure of using a difficult jargon, not to be understood. I think this has been shown over time, that power also relies on not being totally understood by the others or making them believe that you are the owner of some truth that the other cannot understand. So I think we can do a lot about this, overcoming the difficulties with a different language. Of course, this we can do in school, this we can do with adults. When you go into really the field of economics, you have to accept some complexity. But again, even there, I think it can be taught in a way that it is approachable and it is even friendly and interesting. In terms of the language, I think there is a difference also in terms of language that you can use with men and women to make it easier. Women tend to be more easily attracted by more concrete examples, more lifetime experiences, and hence we can start from there. There are now a lot of pedagogic analysis showing that this is a very useful way to teach, starting from life experiences and things that appear to be relevant, rather than just theory and then go into the experience. I don't know whether I answered.
Thank you, Magda. I have an anonymous question for Sandra. Do you have any advice for young women who are starting their careers in the economic sector?
In general, economics in general, so not...
Yes. Very broad.
Very broad. But
you can choose whatever.
Sure.
Also,
maybe
because I don't know who asked the question, so...
A bit more specific, and I'm happy to follow up later with whoever was asking the question, but maybe I'll pick up on some of the issues that Magda was raising. So again, it comes down to the question of confidence and not feeling that economics is something that you cannot master, that it's complex. I completely agree with Magda that I think we can teach it in a much more intuitive way. We could use much more intuitive language to bring down some of these barriers to entry. But at the end of the day, it is a complex science. We need to study math. We need to understand it well if we want to do good economics. And so what I think is perhaps more needed is making sure that we have the right interventions and the right supportive environment for women to thrive in economics. So I was just thinking, listening to Magda, of a couple of years ago, I was paired as a mentor to a young student at Princeton University. This was a fantastic organization called Research in Color, and so they were pairing young college students with professors in economics to try to make sure that they had an opportunity to really understand what economics was about. And so when we first started working together, the first thing she said is, I'm not going to do economics, by the way. I think I'm going to go into political science because I failed Math 101, which would be one of the starting sequence of mathematics and economics in her first year in college. And so I don't even remember the rest of the project that we developed together through the mentorship program, but most of my work was to make sure that there were people at the university who could talk to her, who could bend some of these rules and make sure that women are not barred from accessing economics just because they simply failed one initial test. And so she, in the end, she did end up majoring in economics. And those are the types of crucial moments, crucial junctures that I think we need to work on a lot better and not create rules that can, these artificial barriers for people to get access to economics. So.
Very good. Thank you very much. Ginny, before letting you talk again, you've mentioned your project, the Ortigia, Fondazione Ortigia. And I know, because somebody told me, that there is a mentor and two mentees for this project. Would you like to introduce your colleagues?
It's very related to what you said. We are working in the south of Italy, where we have a problems, of course, of female employment. And so meaning that we have a problem of economic opportunities, but also of role models to the young female university students. So what we are doing with our organization is that providing a mentorship to female students at the university at various regions in Italy, from Sicily to Campania to Calabria and others, and we match them with professional working in corporations that help them understand what are the possibilities, the work possibilities in various organizations based on their on their topic of graduation. So we've been running this program since 3 years now with a lot of success because we are providing, let's say, job orientation to female university students in the South, and at the same time providing the opportunities for managers in corporation being based in the South or in the North of Italy to give back about their experience. So yes, I'm happy to see if Ornella, we have Ornella Pescara, who is a mentor in our programs, and also we have 2 students. Yes, okay, Felixia and Valentina, and I'm happy to, maybe if you want to say something about your mentorship experience.
It should work. Try, yeah? It doesn't work. Can you try again, please?
Now it's green?
Okay, great.
Okay. Thank you, Ginny, and everybody for inviting me to testify for this experience as a mentor to this program, the Young Women Empowerment Program of Ortigia. I work in banking. I'm a banker. I've been working for a while now, first in Citibank, and now I am in Intesa Sanpaolo. So when I joined this program, it was sort of like volunteered by my boss in the bank. And the bank has been one of the first organizations who participate in this program because it really fit with the diversity and inclusion strategy of the bank and the action that the bank is carrying out to empower female empowerment. So when I joined back in 2020, that was one of the first section of the program, and I was asked to participate. I was not quite really sure about it. You know, it was another task to accomplish. It was something that wouldn't fit in my routine, the working and personal routine, something that would take me out of the comfort zone. So these were all the cons, and the cons were those reasons that decided me to join the program. And with a lot of doubt, would I be skilled enough and competent enough? But it turned out to be much easier than I thought, in the sense that I just let me driven. By also the mentee I was associated to. And I just participate with sort of an open-minded listening and ask a lot of questions, try to read between the lines. I don't know if it's proper English, among the lines, of what the mentee was transmitting me, was telling me, was asking me for. So the job was really, the experience was really enriching for me. And what I thought it would have been a difficult job was an easy job. It was it was an open window on the young women, because the program is addressed to women, to young women students of universities, as Ginny was saying. And I was one of the 40 mentors that Intesa Sanpaolo invited to join the program, and there were only ladies. So it was sort of like we were trying to play a sort of role model for these young students. And I took, it was a very good experience, a lot of bursts of energy for me. I did once, and I thought, okay, I'll do it again. And so I joined also on the session, the 2021-22 session. Life is never a straight line, because then the mentee had a different background.
Let's hear from one of these mentees who are here, just
this Barbara.
To hear their version. Yeah. Thank you very much. Anyway, Ornella Pescara.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here tonight, and I wrote something down, but I don't know, maybe I will write it. The best part about being selected as a mentee in this program was that I felt very connected with my mentor, and because she told me about all her insecurities, all her fears, and I really felt like there was a mirror in front of me. And it was special We analyzed together all my background and also my all my soft and hard skills, and we figured out together a way to write down my CV. I mean, it was a very special initiative, and I'm very proud to be here today as a mentee because, it was special, really. Is there Felicia here? Oh, it's not here. Oh, I'm sorry. Anyways.
She stayed in Syracuse, no?
I don't know. Okay,
Okay.
that's all,
Okay, no, thank you very much.
Thank you, really.
And congratulations for being such an enthusiastic mentee for this program. Jeannie, do you want to add anything
No,
about that?
I'm fine. I leave the room for the other questions. Thank you.
Okay, very good, very good. So there is a question. I wanted to give the chance to our Deputy Ambassador, Eleanor, mentioned that this is part of a series of events that we branded Women In. And I can say that the initiator of it was one colleague who once approached the then ambassador saying that there was a big event, a big initiative in London called Women in Finance, and that we should be the first country in Europe to bring that format in Italy. And given the fact that the Borsa Italiana was then part of the London Stock Exchange, would make a lot of sense to partner with the Borsa Italiana and to run this initiative, the Women in Finance in Italy. And since that idea, which was welcomed with enthusiasm by the then ambassador, we run several editions of the Women in Finance Awards in Milan. That colleague is called Sarah Hailing, and she put in a question, and I'm inviting Sarah, welcome back to the residence here, to ask your question for the panelists. Microphone? Try to...
Hello?
Yes,
Okay.
it works.
It works.
Yes.
Good evening, everybody. Yes, no, I'm a former colleague of Novella's who's organized this wonderful meeting here today. And I'm deeply involved, or was deeply involved with Women in Finance and other women in events that started the sort of the program running. And it's really great to see it continuing. And I hope it continues for a lot longer, even though I hope there is no need for it to continue. My one question was, very quickly, to probably, and it involved also Annalisa, is if it's possible to measure the value of diversity economically.
This is a challenging question from Sarah. Does anyone want to... Jeannie, you happen to have the only microphone. Do you want to try and give an answer, or probably give the microphone to...
I start, and then they go into the expert go into details, okay?
Okay, yes.
I mean, there have been a lot of researchers measuring the economic value of diversity into corporate performance, into governance of the boards. So there is definitely some numbers around it. Of course, there are a lot of researchers also about the quotas legislation and the values of that, having a larger amount of the minority group into the group. What does it mean? So becoming from the token to becoming a voice in a majority group. So I think there is definitely a lot of evidences that this is working. So we really need now all together, women and men, really move it forward, because these researches happened 10 years ago. They started discussing this more than 10 years ago. Progress are being made, but not that much and not that quick. So that's why I think that now is really the time to together, from the different sector, from the politics as well, to try to really move things forward. Otherwise, we've been, discussing this in decades. But if you want to go into more details about the numbers, yeah.
Do numbers exist on this? Does anyone know? Magda, maybe you
well, as Ginny was saying, there are numbers related, for example, to their presence in the boards. But I would say 10 years ago, we started with this big project that we did. I was saying 10 years ago, we tried to estimate the impact of having women increase their employment rate up to the male in Italy. And we estimated that if employment rate of women went to 60%, that was the male rate, there would be an increase of 7% in the GDP, in the Italian GDP. So that was our contribution. It was a bit rough. It was assuming that productivity wouldn't go down, so a lot of assumptions. But just to say that the impact might be really big.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much. We're almost at the end of our time available. I will ask a very final question myself, if I may, to each and every one of you to answer very quickly. So yeah, starting with Sandra. So what's the prospect for gender balance in economics? How do you see the coming months and years in this field? Are you optimistic?
I am. I think there are lots of reasons for us to be optimistic. So we do see more and more women, well, winning Nobel Prizes, going into certain fields. I think the pace has been slow. I'm particularly worried about the impact of COVID recently. I think it was a big shock for women, and a lot of them retreated from the labor force. This has been documented, or they have shifted towards part-time work. I think that transition will be slow again, and so we need to pay attention to that, because we've lost much of the progress that has been made in recent decades, was lost with COVID. So again, I think there's a lot to be optimistic about, but we need a lot of creative thinking of, again, creating these enabling environments to bring women back into the labor force in a variety of sectors. So. Okay.
Thank you. Ginny?
As I said, I think we need to be pragmatic. We need to start being pragmatic. I want to mention a project I was involved with the former Ministry of Pari Opportunità. I don't know if you heard about it. This is, it's called Certificazione di Genere. It's a new certification under the UNI-ISO quality type of certification. So it's a certification that helps companies. It's not mandatory. It's an opportunity for companies to measure their numbers and their processes on the topic of gender equality and salary equality and parental leaves on a number of dimensions. Companies can assess how they score on certain KPIs, and if they score a certain amount, they got this certification that give companies some fiscal advantages, right? This is something that I think it is very pragmatic. It can help drive the change in those companies that are not multinational, so they don't receive this type of input from their headquarters somewhere else, but also from small and medium enterprises in Italy that, for the sake of having some fiscal, advantage. I mean, that is a legit driver. They maybe start this journey, starting assessing if they have equal salary in their workforce and all these aspects. So this certification have been funded by the PNRR. Of course, now we had a change in the government, so we will see how this will be, brought through, but I really think that as a society we need to put in place some pragmatic measure now. It's not enough to discuss. Even if awareness is very good, it's always useful, but now we need really to start doing something pragmatic. So that was a specific project that I'm happy to share for your information.
Thank you. And finally, last but not least,
can I just jump in just to say something that I forgot I think all these regulatory interventions are critical. One thing that I think we haven't discussed as much tonight, and also has been documented again with the impact of COVID, is the lack of childcare for women to stay in the labor force. And I think that is a critical obstacle that as a society we need to work on. It's the only way to give women flexibility to not have to exit the labor force and then try to re-enter some years later. So I would just add that to the regulatory environment.
Very.
Yeah, totally agree with what has been said. So I would add to what, well, of course, Sandra was saying, that's the main problem that we really have to address. I think no country has really solved this effectively. Maybe a bit more the northern countries, but no really solid solutions. And in general, we do need, I mean, I'm positive as well, I'm optimistic, but we need to do a lot. We need affirmative actions. I think there's no way out. Jeannie was citing some. We saw the impact of quotas in Italy on listed companies. We saw that as soon as we have an example, one company that delisted, and immediately the whole board became male. So we need to keep affirmative actions. We saw it in banks. Banks which were not listed did not bring women in the board. As Bank of Italy, we strongly invited. We're actually forcing them to have women. So we need, for at least, well, a certain period, we do need affirmative actions.
Okay, thank you very much. Magda, we come to the end of this panel. I hope you enjoyed. I apologize with all those who have put their questions, but we didn't have time to put them to our great panelists. I would like to thank Magda Bianco, Sandra Sequeira, and Jeannie Dupasquier for being with us. Thank you very much for all your thoughts and inputs, for sharing your personal experience. Very interesting, I think inspirational for our young participants. And I would like the audience to give a round of applause, not only to the panelists, but also to you who made a lot for the success of this session. Thank you very much. And an important piece of news is that risotto is waiting next door. So enjoy it. Thank you very much.